The AFC South features new coaches, new quarterbacks, new receivers, new linemen, plenty of change. The big question, though, will it matter? The answer is not going to be the same for every team. You can find some upside targets in this division, but you're also going to find some guys and some spots that you're better off just ignoring. We're going to run through every team to sort through all of those players and all of those situations in an all new Draft Sharks podcast right now. Welcome to the latest episode of our divisional preview series. It is AFC South Day. I am Matt Schauf with Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com. We're running through every team one at a time, packaging them into their divisions. Like I said, AFC South time. And Jared, let's jump right in with the Houston Texans. 2024 did not go quite the way they hoped.
Yeah, definitely one of the more disappointing offenses in the NFL last year. If you look at where these guys were drafted versus where they finished in fantasy. Houston last year finished 19th in points. They were 22nd in both yards and yards per play. That was down from top 13 finishes in all three of those metrics in 2023. There were a bunch of problems with this offense. CJ Stroud taking at least a small step back was part of it, but the bigger ones were the wide receiver injuries. You had Nico Collins missed 5 games. Stephon Diggs missed 9 games. Tank Dell missed 3 games. And to me, the biggest problem was the offensive line. It was one of the worst units in the NFL last year. If you look at ESPN's win rate metric, the Texans were 31st in run block win rate, 22nd in pass block win rate. Despite that, this was a pass-leaning offense. Houston finished 9th in pass rate. They were 10th in neutral pass rate, 5th in pass rate over expected. Although, that probably matters a bit less because we do have a brand new play caller here in 2025.
Yes, and that is the first change we'll talk about on the What's New portion. OC Bobby Slowick is gone from that disappointing offense, clearly taking at least some of the blame for what happened with Houston last year. The new guy is Nick Caley. He has not been an OC in the NFL before. He was pass game coordinator and tight ends coach for the Rams the past 2 years. Coached tight ends and fullbacks for the Patriots 6 years before that. So nearly all of his time in the NFL has been spent coaching under Josh McDaniels or Sean McVay. So it's a little bit tough for us to know for sure what he wants to do, what he plans to do with this offense. But we can look at the way they changed up their personnel, what they added this offseason, and maybe get some hints. So first of all, they lost Stephon Diggs, letting him go in free agency. They're probably going to be without Tank Dell. That's not really a change, but he's got that late season injury. Looks like he's unlikely to contribute this season. So early in the offseason, Houston traded for wide receiver Christian Kirk from the Jaguars. Didn't give up a whole lot to get him, but they are paying him quite a bit of money this year, so he's clearly going to at least open the season as a starter. Jaden Higgins, early in round 2, became the team's first pick of this year's NFL draft. They took his teammate from college, wide receiver Jalen Noel, in round 3, and then they traded up in round 4 to draft running back Jo'quavious Marks, or as we all know, the short name for Jo'quavious, Woody. They signed Nick Chubb after the Browns released him following the draft, and those running back moves became more important with the latest news of Joe Mixon that we are going to talk about.
Yeah, lots of moving parts here, and I think Houston's offense has one of the wider ranges of outcomes in the NFL this season. There's plenty of talent here. We know Nico Collins is a stud. I think Jaden Higgins is going to be awesome. They have a couple other rookies who could contribute. Between Nick Caley being a total mystery box, first time calling plays at any level, I see some shades of both Josh McDaniels and Sean McVay in the moves they made this year. I think, Woody Marks, that pass catching running back, that reminds me of like a McDaniels offense, all the great pass catching backs they had. But then, Sean McVay, the thing I think about when I think about McVay is the heavy 3 wide receiver sets. And I do think this offense is set to be near the top of the league in terms of 3 wide receiver sets. But just in general, I think there's a lot of unknown here. And the offensive line remains a major issue. They traded away their best O-lineman this offseason in Laramie Tunsil. They added some guys, but no stud. So I guess they're just banking on this group as a whole being better, because personnel wise, it is not better than it was last year.
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do with this offense going into 2025 is not assume too much. There is plenty of talent, so we don't want to forget about it, but we don't want to assume they're going to be this, they're not going to do that. We're going to watch and see what happens. Let's move into targets now, and this is an area that should have started with yet another celebration of Joe Mixon, who we always like, but he's suddenly a negative value by our ADP index looking at consensus ADP because Joe Mixon moved down our rankings recently, because we recently got the report that not only has he been out of practice, but he's going to be out a while longer with a nagging foot injury. It had been reported like an ankle sprain that didn't seem like a big deal, and he was more sidelined for precautionary reasons. I'm worried at this point. So I immediately went from targeting Joe Mixon to, I guess I'm not going to draft Joe Mixon for now, and we'll see where he
Yeah,
settles.
the ADP on our feed right now, I'm sure hasn't totally caught up yet. So we'll see how far Mixon drops. Like for me, if he starts going in round 7 or 8, I'm going to be interested again. At this point, we know he's pretty much going to be out from now until week 1. Ian Rappaport said there's a chance he misses week 1. There was another report from Aaron Wilson, one of the top Texans insiders, that seemed a bit more optimistic. It was still like they're holding Mixon out for August, but he has a chance to be ready for week 1. So it's still kind of up in the air at this point. What we do know is that Mixon was awesome last year, finished 10th among running backs in PPR points per game. Actually, RB5 if we omit the 2 games he left early. One, he got hurt, and then he got pulled in week 18 in a game the Texans weren't playing to win. That's still the upside here. Whether he still has that ceiling is debatable because, like you said, Matt, they did add a couple of running backs here in Nick Chubb and Woody Marks. But again, if Mixon's going to start going around 7 or 8, or we're drafting him as our RB3, RB4, whether it's smart or not, I might still be in on this guy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Looking at his underdog ADP right now, he's RB22. I think that's probably the current most accurate because people are constantly drafting on there. So that's a range where I'm like, okay, maybe I'll take him, but I'm not totally in on him at that level. I'm curious to see exactly where he goes. And I think that there's a wide range of potential draft spots for him within each individual draft, because you'll get into a league where just nobody wants to touch him. You'll get into another where somebody's like, I'll take Mixon here because of how he scored last season. So I think there's going to be plenty of variability. I'm fine with him as my RB3. I think it would have to be a very late RB2 and then a quick RB3 pick for insurance behind him if I were going to take him in that range. So it's going to be somebody that we watch throughout this month, not only if he returns to the field, but specific reports on him. I'm concerned because he already came in with the age concern. So you add the foot. Your foot has to be all the way better for it to just not be an issue after you get back on the field. So there's a chance for, even once he gets back on the field, for that to be a problem. I'm going to make sure I keep the risk in mind no matter where he's going and when I'm considering whether to draft him. I'm going to leave Woody Marks and Nick Chubb out for a minute because they're not really factors in my outlook on Mixon. It's just about how healthy he is. Nico Collins we can't call him a strong target, I think, because he's like mid-round 2, but wide receiver 7, number 14 overall. So I guess first half of round 2 by our consensus ADP. I like him. He's a solid value by our ADP market index in that range. He was a stud before getting hurt last year. He was still fine, but not quite studly after coming back. So I'm willing to bet on Nico Collins putting up big points in an offense that might have to lean more pass if Joe Mixon's a problem.
Yeah, we have Nico Collins wide receiver 6 and 10th overall. So, 4 spots ahead of the ADP in terms of overall. So definitely a target for me. I mean, the tricky part is there are so many quality players at the 1-2 turn this year that it's tough to parse them. I feel great about Nico Collins. He's been a stud for the past 2 years now. Wide receiver 10 last year in PPR points per game. Wide receiver 8 if we get rid of the 2 games he left early. That was despite the Texans offense disappointing. And as you said, Matt, that midseason hamstring injury that Nico Collins suffered cost him a handful of games. Also, he wasn't quite as good after coming back from that hamstring. He was actually wide receiver 3 in PPR points per game before getting hurt. He was wide receiver 25 only 6 games post-injury. Part of that, I think, was the Texans offense in general. Part of it is maybe Nico just wasn't fully back to 100%. To me, durability is the biggest concern for Nico Collins. He has missed time now in all 4 of his NFL seasons with a shoulder injury, groin injury, foot injury, hamstring injury, another hamstring injury last year. So there's been some lower body concerns here, but when this guy's been on the field, he's been incredible. He's actually just one of 4 wide receivers to average 2.5 plus yards per route in both of the last 2 seasons. The other 3 are Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, and AJ Brown. So that's the territory this guy belongs in terms of pure talent. And I think he's going to continue to be the clear number 1 target in this passing game.
It is okay to be out on Nico Collins at his cost if you want to because of that durability risk, like we talked about with T. Higgins, but it's also quite possible to draft insurance behind it. I'd rather be on that side of Nico Collins. CJ Stroud, I think, is somebody that should be more of a target than he is, especially with this Mixon news. Going in round 12 by ADP, QB 20, we already have a top 12 season from him before this past season. I do think that the Mixon foot issue at the very least adds overall passing game upside. This could be a team that just has to lean pass, because I don't believe that a Woody Marks, Nick Chubb backfield is going to match what Joe Mixon was workload and production wise last year.
Yeah, Stroud isn't a target or a fade for me at this point. He is quarterback 19 in ADP. We have him quarterback 20 in our rankings. We have him at 60% pass right now. We haven't adjusted that post Mixon news. 60% is already on the higher end. Maybe we should bump it up a half percentage point or a point, and that would definitely bump Stroud up. But again, I have questions about the offense. The wide receiver core could be better than it was last year and even the year before if these rookies hit, if Christian Kirk rebounds, if Nico Collins stays healthy. But again, the play calling questions, we just don't know what Kaylee's going to be. The offensive line questions, and then Stroud also is just not going to give us much on the ground. So yeah, that kind of hurts his upside. I don't think it's going to kill me if I don't have a ton of CJ Stroud in best ball or even lineup setting, but he's someone I'm definitely willing to take on my Nico Collins teams. If I draft Jaden Higgins later, I will definitely take Stroud in best ball as a stack partner.
Yeah, I certainly agree that CJ Stroud is not a player you must have in 2025. Jaden Higgins shows as a slight negative value by our EP index, enough to actually impact the way I would draft him. He's mid-round 12 in consensus ADP for PPR right now. That's wide receiver 5-6 range. I like him in there. You already talked about how you think he's going to be a very good player. The Texans clearly made a bet on him by drafting him 34th overall, and he lands in a good situation where you already mentioned Nico Collins is the number one, but a number one who has missed time every season. So there's some upside on the target share front if that happens. The number two wide receiver this year is either going to be Higgins or Christian Kirk. And Christian Kirk is not a strong wide receiver two if he does open the season as their number two target. That adds upside to Jaden Higgins potentially being one of those rookie wide receivers that comes on late in the season. Even if he doesn't deliver for you in September, early October, by the end of the year, he's one of those guys where you're like, man, I should have been drafted.
Right, you're drafting him as a bench player, so you don't need him to produce right away. The thing I like here is that, Christian Kirk and their other rookie, Jalen Noel, they're slot receivers. They're competing for the same role. Jaden Higgins, unless he face plants, and everything we've heard out of Texans camp so far is he had a strong spring and has continued that in training camp. So I think he's pretty much locked into that other outside wide receiver job opposite Nico Collins. And if the Texans passing game does bounce back, remember in 2023, they produced a pair of top 12 wide receivers in PPR points per game. Nico Collins finished 8th. Tank Dell finished 12th. We're definitely not expecting Jaden Higgins to come anywhere close to that level of production, but there is room for even Nico Collins to be that top 5 wide receiver, but also Jaden Higgins to be top 40, maybe even a top 30 type wideout.
Yeah, a year ago, we had Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs all going inside the first 4 rounds, I believe it was. CJ Stroud was like QB5. So the way these guys are priced now, it's very easy to make the upside case. Christian Kirk, tougher to make the upside case, like the ceiling case for Christian Kirk, because he's nothing special. He never has been, but he's also going at a level where he doesn't have to be something special. Round 12, 13 turn, positive value by our ADP market index. He's behind guys like Jack Besh, Marquise Brown, Marvin Mims. I'm not excited about Christian Kirk. Let me make that clear, but I like him fine in that range, and especially for a lineup setting. I don't think Christian Kirk is going to be a ceiling play, but I do think he's going to do pretty well on the target front, especially early in the season.
Yeah, I'll take Christian Kirk in best ball at his, wide receiver 59 ADP or whatever it is, because I do think the most likely outcome is that Kirk does hold off Noel to be the Texans' primary slot receiver this season. The fact that he's the veteran, the Texans did trade a pick, a 7th round pick, to make sure they got him. The Jags reportedly were going to release Christian Kirk, but I think, the Texans wanted to give up something to make sure they got him. Definitely not an exciting player. Kirk has never finished higher than 20th among wide receivers in PPR points per game, and he's only once finished better than 32nd. So I think you're probably looking at a wide receiver 4 type. When we get into lineup setting drafts, he's not someone I'm going to be interested in. I'd rather take a shot on a higher upside player at that point in drafts. But in best ball, where, just some steady snaps and production is worth a bit more, I think Kirk is fine at cost.
I think lineup setting he can fit if you drafted a couple of riskier wide receivers ahead of it and you're looking for some insurance, because I do think especially early in the season, he's somebody who could easily give us 6, 7, 8 targets per game, especially if we're looking at a Houston team missing Joe Mixon.
Yep, I think when our week 1 rankings come out, Kirk will probably be the second Texans wide receiver in the rankings ahead of even Jaden Higgins. Rookies tend to get off to slower starts.
And I predict I'll tell Jared that I think he should be higher in the wide receiver.
I could see that. Yep.
Woody Marks, not really a target, although I haven't done a draft since the Joe Mixon report came out. So he might actually be a target in that mid-round 18 range. He's RB 66 by best ball ADP right now. And for me, The key here is less about Woody Marks, obviously some about Joe Mixon's injury, but also about him being 4 rounds behind Nick Chubb in consensus ADP. We don't know for sure what the backup plan will be when Joe Mixon is not playing. And when it's unclear like that, I would much rather take the younger guy who has the receiving ability. Nick Chubb has a track record of strong rushing. He's also got 2 straight years lost to lower body injuries. Cleveland dumped him. He signed a small deal with Houston. He's a fine guy for Houston to have around. There's not a whole lot of fantasy upside, I don't believe, this season. And even the absolute best case scenario for Nick Chubb this year does not include a lot of receiving. So I'd rather bet on the rookie that they traded up to get, who has the receiving, and we'll see what happens with the rushing.
Yeah, one of the reasons I'm still in on Mixon is because I'm just not excited about Woody Marks or Nick Chubb. Like, I still think if Mixon puts this foot injury behind him, he's still going to be the clear lead back in Houston. With Woody Marks, to me, the most interesting thing about him is the move the Texans made to get him in the draft. They sent the 179th overall pick and next year's 3rd round pick to the Dolphins to move up and take Marks at 116th. They made an aggressive move to get him, but there's just nothing in his profile that gets me excited. He has the big raw receiving production in college, 261 catches across his 5 college seasons, 40 plus catches in 4 of his 5 years. The efficiency was not great, 5.9 yards per catch. You look at his rankings in PFF receiving grades, like good, but never dominant. And then his rushing profile is even less exciting. He never topped 121 carries in any of his first 4 seasons at Mississippi State. He averaged 9.1 carries per game over that span. He did set career highs last year with 198 carries, 1,133 yards, 5.7 yards per carry at USC. But even then, his advanced metrics, 27th among 31 combine RBs in yards after contact per attempt, 29th in missed tackles forced per attempt. So, and then he also disappointed at the combine as well, 4.54 40 time at 207 pounds, a 38th percentile speed score. So I don't see what the Texans saw. What the Texans see is probably more important, because if that means playing time, that means he's going to be at least someone worth considering in fantasy. But as a prospect, Woody Marks just does not get me excited at all.
Oh, yeah. I don't even care about him as a prospect. It's volume over everything here. If the market were excited, I'd be like, yeah, but he's not that good a player. The market's not excited, so I'm like, yeah, but they traded up to get him, and he can catch passes, and the guys ahead of him are Joe Mixon with a bad foot and the ghost of Nick Chubb. So I'll take him late, and if he turns into nothing, then I've lost nothing. On the neutral front for me, Dalton Schultz, late round 17, fine. If you're stashing a tight end at that point, if you're looking for a late second or a third tight end, best ball wise, certainly fits fine. He's going to be their main guy at that position. Jalen Noel's interesting. I think it's got to be a deeper league for him to make sense on benches, but we'll be watching throughout the season to see if he starts working, even with has a chance to pass Christian Kirk.
And Noel's even someone who, as we get into lineups and innings, I might be more interested in drafting him just because I can see what he does for the first month. And if he's not making up ground on Christian Kirk, I can just drop him. But if you take him in best ball, you could be taking a bunch of zeros from Noel if he's not playing ahead of Christian Kirk. Dalton Schultz is, we've talked about, I think, Juwan Johnson, Kate Otten, just these late tight ends who are just going to be on the field. So like in best ball, if you're looking for a third tight end, I do think Schultz is a pretty good bet to remain Houston's lead pass catching tight end this season. Although I will say Cade Stover kind of started some ground, at least on Schultz, in terms of playing time over the final quarter of last season. So I'm at least going to be keeping an eye on Stover just to make sure Schultz is still a clear leader here.
My only fade in Houston is Nick Chubb. I'm simply not interested.
I can't believe how excited people seem to be about him. I would just think in today's fantasy landscape, people would want the rookie over the 29-year-old Nick Chubb. But all the buzz I've heard since the Mixon news is, people wanted to draft Nick Chubb. I'm with you, Matt. I mean, he's 29 years old. He's had significant, serious lower body injuries each of the last 2 seasons, 3.3 yards per carry last year. And again, behind what's going to be a bad Texans O-line. I don't think the efficiency is going to be there, and I don't think the volume is going to be there either, unless Mixon's absence extends deep into the season.
Mm-hmm. I think the ceiling here is like better Deontay Foreman, which is not somebody that I'm interested in. All right, Indianapolis Colts. The season went even worse for them than it did the Texans last year. What do we got?
My least favorite team to do projections for this season, because it's 2 different offenses. It was 2 different offenses last year if you look at Anthony Richardson games versus the Joe Flacco games. 10 full Richardson games, the Colts averaged 58.2 plays per game, one of the lowest marks in the NFL, with a 47% pass rate. In the other 7 games, 65.6 plays per game. That would be in the top 5 in the NFL, with a 59% pass rate. They went from super run heavy with Richardson to pass leaning with Joe Flacco. In terms of points per game last year, 20.4 points per game with Richardson. That would have ranked 22nd in the NFL. 24.7 without Richardson. That would have been 11th in the NFL. So just trying to figure out this offense in 2025, it really just boils down to who's going to be under center. And, obviously at this point we don't know. And even as we get into the season, I would expect we're going to see both of these quarterbacks during the 2020.
And of course, the new quarterback here is Daniel Jones. The team decided to let Joe Flacco walk, sign Daniel Jones to a 1-year, $14 million contract. Nearly all of that is guaranteed. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to start, but it sure gives us a signal that it's a for real competition for the starting job after the way Anthony Richardson played last year. They drafted tight end Tyler Warren, 14th overall, second tight end drafted after Colston Loveland this spring. 2 new starters on the O-line, but not really new starters. They had Ryan Kelly and Will Fries both leave in free agency for Minnesota. Both those guys, though, missed 7+ games last year. So the guys who are replacing them already replaced them last year. So it's rolling over that offensive line. And then DJ Giddens, the running back, joined the team in round 5. Trey Sermon shouldn't be a factor because we want Jonathan Taylor to stay healthy the whole season.
Yeah, not a ton from a fantasy perspective. It's really just Tyler Warren that we're worried about. We know what it's going to be at the wide receiver spots. And then again, it all comes back to the quarterback. For me, the offensive line was such a strength for Indianapolis for a handful of years. It's not the case anymore. I think it's an average group at best with potential downside lower than that.
Player targets, let's go chronologically draft-wise, and that means starting with Jonathan Taylor in the middle of round 2, number 17 overall player, RB9. I'm definitely in on him at that price. We talk about the earlier in the draft you go, the more a guy has to have upside to the top of his position. Taylor has showed us that. The last time that he had a healthy full season, he was the number 1 scoring running back. This team is going to lean on him. I expect that he's going to get significantly more receiving this year than he did last year. However, if it's Richardson, obviously it's not going to be as good for him on that front as if it is Daniel Jones. But either way, it should be better than last year, which was career worst in that area. Jonathan Taylor ran well, meanwhile, last season, right?
Yeah, he was first in the NFL with 21.6 carries per game. He was third in the NFL with 102 rushing yards per game. I just feel like his 2024 season has kind of gone overlooked. He does seem to be climbing in ADP. I think, a couple months ago, he was always there at the end of round 2. Now he's kind of like locked in as a mid-round 2 big. I'm still in on him there. Obviously not as big of a value as he was, but we're going to talk about Richardson splits with all these Colts skill guys. And with Jonathan Taylor, they definitely mattered last year. His 9 games with Richardson, his expected PPR points per game would have ranked 15th among running backs, and his actual PPR points per game was RB11. In the 5 games without Richardson, RB1 in both expected and actual points per game. He got more carries, more targets, more goal line chances. Richardson just does nothing good for Jonathan Taylor. He was fine with Richardson, like a low-end RB1, but he was the best running back in fantasy football in those games that Joe Flacco started.
There you go. That's that upside from a second-round running back. At wide receiver, our consensus ADP right now says that Michael Pittman's in the end of round 9 and that Josh Downs is shortly behind him with Darnell Mooney in between. I'm not sure I believe that because Downs has been the leader between them throughout best ball season. So I think as that ADP really catches up with more drafts later in the summer, I think Downs is going to pass him. But I also think that both guys are values in that low wide receiver 4 range. I will like each guy better with Daniel Jones in the lineup than with Anthony Richardson, but they're going at a level where I don't care to wait for that resolution before I'm willing to take a shot. Because at worst, I wind up with a bench receiver who's a pretty good player who might disappoint me fantasy-wise.
Yeah, to me with these guys, and even just sitting out and doing projections, we have Daniel Jones for 10 games right now and Richardson for 7, but just sitting out and doing it, I think Downs and Pittman are almost priced as if it's going to be Richardson for the entire season. Like Downs at wide receiver 49 in consensus ADP. He was wide receiver 32 last year in PPR points per game. The production was super volatile. He had 7 top 20 weeks, but 5 weeks outside the top 50. The quarterback play obviously has a big part to do with that. The other thing with Downs that always sucks is that he doesn't play in 2 wide receiver sets for the Colts. That could change in 2025. I kind of don't think it will. I think he's going to continue to be their slot guy in 3 wide receiver sets. So that keeps the route rate down, but his per target efficiency was awesome. He drew a target on 28% of his routes last year. That was 5th best among wide receivers. His yards per route was 17th best among wide receivers. And again, these Richardson splits, he was wide receiver 46 in PPR points per game with Richardson, wide receiver 17 in those Joe Flacco games. Now, I don't think Daniel Jones is going to be as productive a passer as Joe Flacco was for the Colts, but it's going to be closer to that than what we got from Anthony Richardson. So again, that's where I'm saying if we do get Jones for most of the season, I think Downs is going to easily beat his current price tag.
He should very easily beat that price tag. Obviously, there's risk that he doesn't, but it's not a big deal if you lose a wide receiver 4 level player to something like that. And the upside, I think, is huge. If he does get a bit more playing time, if he does stay an efficient scorer, if he gets a little bit luckier on touchdowns, it's a good spot for him. He did outperform Michael Pittman Jr. last year. Pittman played through a back injury for basically the whole season. So maybe we'll see a better Pittman this year. And we've gotten good enough production from Pittman through his career so far. So I'll take either of those guys in that range. I am more excited about Downs after what we saw from him last year. And he's just in his 3rd season, so he should still be ascending. I'm also willing to take Tyler Warren. Like back around NFL draft time, I think he was on the path to being overrated, but now he's settled in at like tight end 12 in ADP, early round 11. Not necessarily a target for me, but in a range where if I'm looking tight end, if I don't see anything else that I like, I'm happy to take Tyler Warren because I certainly believe that he has the upside to, reach top 8, maybe even top 6, depending on what that target count looks like for him.
Yeah, I think Warren is fairly priced at this point. He obviously comes with a wide range of outcomes beyond the fact that he's a rookie. All the quarterback and play calling questions we've talked about with this offense kind of gives Warren a wide range of outcomes. But I think you take him and pair him, especially in best ball, with a safer tight end like Jake Ferguson. Yeah, I think that's a really nice combination. Tyler Warren coming off the massive 2024 season at Penn State, 4th most catches and 4th most receiving yards by a tight end in NCAA history, and ran it 26 times for 281 yards and 4 touchdowns. The Colts, since they've drafted him, have been gushing over Tyler Warren and talking about that versatility. I don't think he's going to get enough carries to even really make a dent in his fantasy production, but it's definitely not impossible that he does. We'll see where that goes. But again, there's clearly room for him to be a top 3 option in this passing game because beyond Josh Downs and Michael Pittman, you have Alec Pierce as the next target on this team. And we know what he is, a downfield, low volume type of guy. So the target volume is going to be there. The target share is going to be there for Warren. It comes down to what kind of quarterback play this team gets.
And I think even more important on that rushing front is not so much what it's going to get him rushing wise in the pros, but when a tight end is getting that kind of usage in the offense, it says coaches are like, we got to get this guy the ball. And that's the kind of guy that you like to bet on, even if you don't really know what the picture is going to look like. I'm fairly neutral on DJ Giddens. I think he's a true handcuff. I expect him to be the direct replacement for Jonathan Taylor. So I think he's one of the few guys that if I do take Taylor in round 2, I would strongly consider drafting Giddens in round 19 because I don't need a ceiling player in that range. I'm expecting Taylor to start for me every week. And Giddens, like I said, I do expect to be that direct replacement if I happen to lose Taylor at some point during the season.
It'd be nice to hear something out of Colts camp about this backup running back battle. All you hear from the beat writers are the quarterback competition and how good Tyler Warren looks. I haven't read anything about whether Giddens or Herbert is running as the number 2 running back at this point. So I haven't drafted Giddens much yet just because I'm not sure he's the number 2. But I agree with you, Matt. I do think he's the favorite to be that backup. And if he is, he's obviously worth a look as a handcuff.
Yeah, and certainly if we see that Herbert's actually ahead of him on the depth chart, then scratch everything I just said about Giddens. The quarterbacks are mildly interesting. They're more interesting for their effect on the offense than they are fantasy-wise. I think, Jared, now that they're both going as late as they are, I'd rather take Anthony Richardson. Yep. If I have a best ball team specifically that I've already drafted Josh Downs, and especially if I also have either Michael Pittman or Tyler Warren, then I'm going to go ahead and put Daniel Jones on that team because I think that's the upside case for those guys. But if I don't have any other considerations, Richardson's way more interesting at the range where they're going because even if he's not that much better as a quarterback, even if he's only in there for a few games, every time he steps on the field, he has the upside to finish top 4 at the position.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I've drafted both these guys. I've drafted Jones on teams where I have Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, or Tyler Warren. I've drafted Richardson just as a unstacked quarterback 3. Yeah, like you said, Richardson, he finished quarterback 15 in points per game last year, but that was with one of the worst passing seasons in NFL history. That was purely with the rushing. He had 8.3 carries per game. That was 3rd most among quarterbacks, 2nd among quarterbacks in carries inside the 5-yard line per game. So if he can do that and then just be below average as a passer rather than abysmal, but we're talking about a guy who is going to finish as a top 10 quarterback and could flirt with top 5 production. So I think that's interesting in best ball, even just a stash and your bench in lineup setting leagues. And then Daniel Jones, like he's a better passer than Richardson. He's also going to run, but not nearly to the extent. But we've seen Jones have top 15-ish fantasy seasons because of that rushing ability. So I do think that's in the cards for him too this season. This might be Jones's best setup of his career. I think this Colts supporting cast might be better than anything he had with the Giants.
Yeah, at super flex, I would probably lean Jones because I think he's the better bet to start more games this season. Of course, it's going to come down to what coaches think heading into the season. I don't have any true fades for this team because I don't think any Colt is expensive enough, except for Jonathan Taylor if you don't like him for some reason. I don't think anybody else on the team is expensive enough to even qualify.
No fades. I'll even take Alec Pierce in best ball because I think he's going to be on the field. We'll see about AD Mitchell. See if he can push Pierce for playing time.
Sounds like he's not having a great
saw
game.
that, yeah. A few will say I'm not giving up on AD, but I do think Pierce is the favorite. So you just be on the field. And when he is, again, that downfield, high yards per catch guy that does work in best ball. Lineup setting, no interest in him, but Pierce is cheap enough in best ball where I do think he's a fine pick.
And stacking Richardson and Alec Pierce at the end of a best ball draft is a sneaky way to maybe even steal some more points out of that potential Richardson starting span, whatever it looks like. Jacksonville Jaguars, what did 2024 look like that made them blow the whole thing up?
Yeah, kind of similar to Houston here. A really disappointing season from Jacksonville. I think injuries played a part in it, but the Jags last year, 26th in points, 25th in yards, 20th in yards per play. They were dead last in plays. So that's something you can hang your hat on that is going to improve in 2025. There should be better play volume here. Injuries played at least some factor. The coaching was bad, and we'll get into that. Brand new coaching staff here. But Trevor Lawrence missed 7 games last year. Evan Ingram missed 8. Christian Kirk missed 7. So that definitely didn't help. A brand new looking Jags offense heading into 2025 here.
Of course, the most impactful move here, backup quarterback Mac Jones is gone. He's taking the Sam Darnold path to redemption out in San Francisco now. So I'm curious to see who he starts for in 2026. Obviously, we've talked lots about new head coach Liam Cohen on this show, in for Doug Peterson. That can only be a good move for the offense. We'll see exactly how good it is. That's the question. But it's no doubt a positive to bring in a coach that is coming off positive impact on the Tampa Bay offense, positive impact at Kentucky, working with Sean McVay in between his 2 Kentucky stints. So there's reason to be at least optimistic and potentially excited about the Jacksonville offense. The offensive coordinator is Grant Udinsky, who is taking his first turn as an OC. He's just 29 years old, so not surprising that he hasn't gotten such an opportunity. Past 3 years under Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, 2 years in Carolina before that. Tough to know exactly what to expect from him, but he's working for a coach that we like offensively and comes from a place that did a lot for fantasy players over the past 3 years. Reason for optimism at the very least. On the personnel front, Jacksonville traded up to get Travis Hunter, 2nd overall in this draft. They took Bashal Tutin in round 4 as a running back, LaQuint Allen, another running back in round 7. And the O-line, they paid up to get Patrick McCarry to play guard, Robert Hainsey to start at center, replacing Brandon Sheriff and center Mitch Morse. We'll see what those offensive line moves mean, but obviously they're trying to improve that.
And Hainsey played under Cohen in Tampa Bay, which you always like at center, especially, right? Like I think it's a pretty important position to understand the offense. So I like that Cohen brought in his center from the Bucs. The O-line is the biggest issue, or the biggest question mark for this team still, but I think they did add 2 quality starters in Hainsey and McCarry.
Player targets, Jared. Why don't we start with the guy you've been talking about for most of the offseason?
I can't believe Trevor Lawrence is still quarterback 20 in ADP. I think he's my favorite value on the board at this point. We have him ranked quarterback 14. Trevor Lawrence last year, he was quarterback 13 in fantasy points per game through week 9 last year before he got hurt. That was a disappointing season from him in the offense, and he was quarterback 13. Part of that is because this guy runs the ball, 18.1 rushing yards per game. That's 13th most among 51 active quarterbacks with 20-plus career starts. The passing is bound to improve with a much better play caller, a better pass catching core. Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. could be one of the best wide receiver tandems in the NFL this year, I think. And you just have what Liam Cohen did with Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay. Baker was good in 2023 under Dave Canales. He scored 32% more fantasy points last year under Liam Cohen. If Cohen can get that out of Baker Mayfield, I'm not saying Trevor Lawrence is going to finish quarterback 3 like Baker did last year, but I think Cohen can get that type of jump out of Lawrence. I think he's plenty talented enough. I think the supporting cast is good.
Yeah, there's plenty of passing ability here. There's rushing ability that was displayed as a college prospect. I can't say that I'm excited about Trevor Lawrence, but the biggest thing is the price. You don't have to be excited. You just have to say, do I think that he's a competent quarterback? Do I think he has a path to some upside this year? Because he's probably going to outscore his draft position unless things go horribly in this Jacksonville offense, especially if you're in on either Brian Thomas Jr. or Travis Hunter, and Even more, especially if you are in on both of those guys, then you got to be in on Trevor Lawrence because they're not both going to pay off without their quarterback also helping out some fantasy teams. Brian Thomas Jr. is just behind Nico Collins in ADP, first half of round 2. Very similar for me. Earlier this draft season, I said I was a little bit concerned that what if Travis Hunter comes in and he is just that good and that takes some target share away from Brian Thomas. But after having both some more time to just kind of think about it, but also seeing more of the things that Liam Cohen has said about Brian Thomas Jr. since taking the job, about wanting to run the pass offense through him, and just thinking about how good Brian Thomas Jr. was in the second half of last year and the challenges that Travis Hunter faces in getting acclimated, I've gotten over any concern. I'm in on Brian Thomas Jr. at his price, especially because I think he probably should be in the end of round 1 ADP.
Yeah, definitely not a guy I want to fade. Even just what he did in his final college season alongside Malik Neighbors, that looks more impressive now after his rookie season. Last year, Brian Thomas, 9.6 yards per target. That was 14th best among 89 qualifying wide receivers. 2.45 yards per route run. That was 6th best among those 89 qualifying receivers. It was the best among 11 qualifying rookie wide receivers. He became just the 6th rookie wide receiver over the last 5 years to top 2.3 yards per route. The others are Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Chris Olave, and then Ladd McConkey as well last year. Those first 4 guys, Nacua, Jefferson, Chase, and Olave, all scored more fantasy points in their second seasons than they did in year 1. So again, just not a guy I'm looking to fade. We have Brian Thomas Jr. 12th in our overall rankings. He's 15th in ADP. So definitely a target for me if I have one of those picks at the end of round 1.
Yeah, if I'm in that position, I have no problem taking Collins and Thomas back to back to start my draft and then see where we go running back wise. Travis Hunter, I've had to kind of mentally reset on him because the way that he was getting drafted right after the NFL draft, I was just expecting to be out on him. It seems like he has slid, especially turning to the lineup setting ADP. Mid-round 6, low wide receiver 3 range. And not necessarily somebody that I'm chasing there, but he does show up as a value by our ADP index in that range. I have nothing against him there. Even if he doesn't work out, that's the kind of not working out that I can deal with because I can draft insurance behind that. I can put Christian Kirk on that team in case Travis Hunter's not working out or in case I want to wait a few weeks before putting Travis Hunter into my lineup just to see how things work out in what's probably going to be a unique situation.
I think I had drafted 0 Travis Hunter until like a month ago, and I've now taken him quite a bit over the past month because, like you said, Matt, his ADP has dropped, and I'm not sure why. People are seeing these snap counts from training camp where he's played more snaps on defense than offense so far, and people are acting like that is telling us what he's going to do during the season. I don't think that's right at all. I think camp is its own thing. He's settling into these positions he's going to play. I don't think it tells us anything. And we still don't know what it's going to look like during the regular season. That's obviously the risk here. But at a wide receiver 29 price tag, he could definitely still not meet that price. That's within the range of outcomes. But I think that doesn't kill your fantasy team at that point. And I do still think there's upside into the top 20 if he is close to a full-time wide receiver with the talent here, with Liam Cohen. Even if you think Brian Thomas is the clear number 1, Travis Hunter is going to be the clear number 2 target when he's on the field. So I think there's plenty of target share and target volume available to him. I do, though, like Hunter better in best ball than lineup setting because if we do get this situation where his offensive snap counts are varying week to week, he's a 90% guy one week, but then 60 the following week, that's going to make him tough in lineup setting leagues. But in best ball, you can just take the hopefully 6 or 7 big spike weeks he gives you.
The thing about uncertainty is we tend to focus on the negative side of it, but the other side is we have no idea how good he's going to be. Maybe at some point they're like, all right, let's ease off the defensive stuff for now because we need him so much on off. We want to get him on the field more at wide receiver. And he spends the second half of the season as a wide receiver who shows up in scant defensive snaps. We have no idea. That's the whole thing about uncertainty. So if he were going higher than he is, I'd say I'm scared of the downside risk. But because it's in that middle to low portion of wide receiver 3 range, I'm like, all right, I'll take a chance on the upside. I'll insure my roster against him after that, make sure that I'm not going to be stuck if he doesn't work out. And then, we'll see. That's the fun part of this game.
Exactly. I thought pre-draft and even right after he was drafted that there was no chance he was going to be a full-time player on offense and defense. I'm starting to change my mind just because everything you hear out of Jacksonville is just, this guy doesn't get tired. The coaches say that. James Gladstone
Yeah.
says that. The beat writers seem to think he actually seems like a freak that might be able to play 80% of the snaps on both sides.
He also just seems like a fun person. I don't think I've ever seen him not smiling. So I don't want to be on the side that's like, oh, I hope Travis Hunter doesn't score a lot of fantasy points this
Agreed.
season. The backfield here is going to be one to really figure out. And I feel like every week gives me different feelings or thoughts about it. For a little while there, Travis Etienne got a little bump because, I don't know, Liam Cohen must have said something nice about him. I certainly was more excited about Bashal Tutin heading into the offseason and summer. But now Tank Bigsby, it's the Tank Bigsby show, according to the Shark Bites.
Exactly. For starters, I think I have at least one Jags running back on over half of my best ball teams so far. And it's pretty evenly split among these three at this point. I've just kind of been playing the market. These guys have been shifting quite a bit in ADP. So I think there's been different times to target each of these three guys. Tank Bigsby right now is still going cheap enough where he's definitely the guy I'm taking the most of. Bigsby had a really nice second season last year. Finished just 43rd in PPR points per game. But the more important stuff for me, 4.6 yards per carry. He was top 9 among 47 qualifying running backs in yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles forced per attempt, rush yards over expected per attempt. Easily beat Travis Etienne in all three of those categories. The concern for Bigsby is just, is there any pass catching upside here? He has 8 catches on 16 targets through 2 seasons now. If that doesn't improve, it caps the ceiling. But where he's going, I mean, he is right now, what is he, RB 46 in ADP. If he stays in that range, and we continue to hear this stuff out of training camp where he has been the primary early down back, I think Bigsby's a smash pick.
Yeah, he hasn't caught many passes in the NFL yet, but he did catch more passes in college. So it's entirely possible that the new staff is like, you guys should be using him as a receiver. Or if he's the best running back, then he's going to be on the field for at least some of the receiving work more than he has been. Travis Etienne's the one I'm most skeptical of among the trio because he's had the most exposure. Had a disappointing season last year, and if it is truly the Tank Bigsby show right now in camp, then that doesn't say anything good about Travis Etienne. So that said, I'm still in on all of them at cost. The whole trio is going in the double-digit rounds in most drafts at this point. That's a level where you can just say, I'm going to take a piece, make sure I'm in whoever gets the touches. And I do think it's going to be a backfield that produces fantasy points. So I want some piece of it in most cases. Fades, there's not a whole lot for me here, Jared. Brenton Strange, really the only Jaguar that I would qualify as a fade. According to our consensus ADP for PPR, it's tight end 30 for him. Best ball ADP is tight end 18, though. I think the truth is probably closer to that number. That's the one I'm fading. If it's tight end 30 and you want to take him, then fine. I don't care.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think Strange is a great player. I don't think there's massive upside here. I do think he's another guy that's just going to be on the field. And I wasn't even sure about that early in the offseason. We do have a brand new coaching staff here. But both James Gladstone and Liam Cohen have talked up Brenton Strange over, throughout this offseason. So I do think he's their lead tight end. That for me puts him in the Juwan Johnson, Cade Otton, Dalton Schultz range. In best ball, he's going to be on the field and he's a fine tight end 3. I don't see upside for lineup setting drafts.
Tennessee Titans 2024 went so great that they've got lots different this year.
What are we I guess we can say that about a lot of teams in this division. Huh? Makes it interesting. The Titans were...
It was an ugly division last year.
The Titans were 27th in points last year, 26th in yards, 27th in yards per play. It was a slow-paced offense. They were 22nd in plays. They were 26th in pace. Not a whole lot to like here. This was a run-leaning offense last year, which is interesting. I think we might see a bit of a shift there with their new quarterback. But last year's Titans, 26th in neutral pass rate, 27th in pass rate over expected. We can talk about Brian Callahan, but I think the pass rate had a lot to do with the quarterback play being so bad.
And speaking of that quarterback play now, that's the big change. You already know that they drafted Cam Ward number 1 overall. You might not remember how bad quarterbacking has been in Tennessee for a while now. So the past 2 years, Will Levis finished as the team's leader in passing. Before that, it was 4 years of Ryan Tannehill doing so. And it was so bad before that Ryan Tannehill was good news for Tennessee in that range. Marcus Mariota for 4 years before Tannehill, Zach Mettenberger the year before that, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Jake Locker, Matt Hasselbeck, 5 years where it was Kerry Collins and Vince Young trading off spots. 2005, the final Steve McNair season there, was really, I think, the last time that they actually had a truly good quarterback. So there's room for this to be quite a positive change for Tennessee.
And again, I think that's interesting to me because of the pass rate projection on this team. Last year's Titans, 56.4% pass. Callahan's 5 Bengals teams, 4 of them were between 60.5 to 63.5% pass rate, which is definitely on the high end. Now, of course, you had Joe Burrow there, but even Burrow's rookie season, they were 60.5% pass. That's a high mark. 2019, Callahan's first season in Cincinnati, they had Andy Dalton as their quarterback, and they were 63.3% pass. So, interesting thing for me here is, with Cam Ward, if he can do enough to earn trust, like, will this become even a pass leaning offense? I think it's a pretty good bet they're going to pass more than last year. But I think there's upside for this to, be a 58, 59% pass rate kind of team.
Now, it's worth focusing a lot on Cam Ward when we're talking about changes for Tennessee, because the other changes, not especially noteworthy. They drafted 2 wide receivers in round 4, Chimere Dike and Alec Iomanner, just to challenge those of us who have to say names on podcasts. They drafted tight end Gunnar Helm in between those guys in round 4. They signed wide receiver Tyler Lockett just before the draft because nobody wants to see him retire just yet. They signed guard Kevin Zeitler, who's entering his age 35 season, so probably good news for Tennessee, but also probably not a savior on the offensive line. Dan Moore, they signed away from Pittsburgh for much bigger money to take over at left tackle, so that says more that they want him to be a savior up front.
Yeah, the pass catching core is different from last year, but still not very good. I mean, we'll see. Same thing with another team that needed to bolster the O-line. I think it's better, but it's still definitely a concern, at least heading into the season.
And that wide receiver core is the biggest reason that we've talked up Calvin Ridley as a target before. We mentioned before that he makes even more sense as a lineup setting target now that we're getting into that portion of the draft calendar more. Late round 6, wide receiver 31. I would still call him a target for this specific time of year because I think he's going to be a really good bet for target volume this year. Maybe the best bet that he's been throughout his career, although there was that one season where he had like 6 games as Atlanta's number 1 wideout before the personal time took him off the field for the rest of the year.
Yeah, so we got 11 games from Ridley last year as Tennessee's clear number 1 wide receiver after DeAndre Hopkins was traded away. In those 11 games, 7.6 targets per game for Ridley on a 24.1% target share. He was 26th among receivers in expected PPR points per game over that span, 28th in actual PPR points per game. I think he has a chance to see similar target share this year with the lack of proven or still good wide receivers around him in Tyler Lockett's case. And I think he should have a quarterback upgrade as well. Ridley could definitely be a nice wide receiver 3, maybe even some upside beyond that.
The backfield remains interesting. Tajay Spears is probably a bigger target for me right now just because of his lower cost, but I think Tony Pollard is going later than he should. RB27 in best ball ADP. That's even later than what his consensus ADP is for PPR leagues right now. That might prove to be his true lineup setting ADP as well. If we're getting Tony Pollard as RB27, then that's a guy that you should target because even though we both hope that Tajay Spears gets the ball more this year, we have to start the season expecting Tony Pollard to work as the clear leader. Maybe not as clear as last year, but still the clear leader in a backfield. He did dominate last season.
Yeah, I want to be out on Tony Pollard, but that price tag says I can't, at least at this point. Pollard finished RB22 in PPR points per game last year. He was only RB30 in the 10 games with a healthy Tajay Spears. I'm definitely more interested in Spears. I just think he could not stay healthy last year. He had an ankle injury in week 2, a hamstring injury in week 6. He had a concussion in week 11, another concussion in week 17. He was just probably never healthy at any point of last season, besides maybe week 1 before the initial ankle injury. If you go back to his rookie season, though, he was really impressive. 14th among 49 qualifiers in yards per carry, 4th among those 49 in missed tackles forced per attempt, and he's an excellent pass catching back. 52 catches as a rookie in 2023. Even last year, 30 catches, 224 yards, and a score. He was 13th among running backs in yards per route run. Everything we heard from Tennessee's coaching staff last offseason was these guys are interchangeable. It's going to be a committee. And then even this May, Brian Callahan basically said he wants to take some work off of Tony Pollard's plate because he wore down last season. So I just think you're going to get a much tighter split this year than we saw last year, assuming Spears can stay healthy.
Yeah, I expect that as well. My ideal situation for drafting these guys is that somebody else takes Tony Pollard before I'm ready to, and then I stash Tajay Spears as my RB4, and then just wait and see what happens. Hope that he gets more work early on. Not hoping for a Tony Pollard injury, but ready to definitely cash in if that does
Spears
happen.
is one of my highest owned running backs in best ball rate.
Any other particular targets among Titans?
Chico Conco, baby. I'm back in. The ADP is interesting. He's tight end 18 in our consensus ADP, but he's tight end 25 on Underdog and FFPC. I think 25 is closer to where he's going to go in your draft. We have him ranked tight end 18, though. And it's largely because of what he did over the final 5 games of last season. I know it's a tiny sample size, but it was an impressive 5 games, 7.6 targets per game on a 22% target share. He was tight end 13 in PPR points per game over that span. Brian Callahan couldn't stop talking Chig Okonkwo up late last season, December. There were multiple press conferences where he was basically saying this guy has figured it out. It would not be the first time that we've seen a tight end take 3-4 years to figure it out. Chig Okonkwo is 26 years old. That is right around peak age for tight ends based on our aging curve research. And the other reasons I like him, one is the quarterback upgrade. I think Tennessee's offense is just going to be better. The passing game is going to be better this year. But then second, Okonkwo could be the number 2 target in this passing game, right? The wide receiver core is, again, unproven, or guys that are well past their prime beyond Calvin Ridley. So there's a chance that Okonkwo is the number 2 target in what's like an average passing game. And if that's the case, like he could definitely finish as a top 15 tight end.
I like the opportunity. I like the price. He's at the bottom probably of tight end 2 territory, as you mentioned. And that late season surge last year didn't quite make him a tight end 1 level performer, even in expected fantasy points. But there's probably more room for upside beyond that. So if I wait a long time on tight end, as some of our draft guides suggest doing, I think Chig Okonkwo is a good guy to pair with somebody else in that range. Like get Okonkwo and Mike Gesicki as your tight end, and then platoon them, watch for matchups, see if one guy emerges as a better weekly bet for targets. That's where I would certainly like Okonkwo. And for all the reasons that you just said, I think there is upside to him. I don't have any fades on this team because, like I said with others, not anybody from Tennessee is expensive enough to really count as a fade for me here. Softer targets, like I'm not going after Cam Ward, but late round 18, QB 27, certainly upside in there. If I start my draft with a stud quarterback and I get to the end and I don't see any exciting upside wide receivers or handcuff running backs, I could stash Cam Ward and see what happens, especially in case he has some early spike weeks and becomes an attractive potential trade chip for somebody else in my league. We've talked about the passing game and the opportunity that presents to Calvin Ridley and Chig Okonkwo. I'm still interested in Alec Iomanner at the very end of a draft, stashing him. And
Iomanner, from what I've seen, has been, not that any of them have been creating a ton of buzz, but I guess I've read the most positive stuff on Iomanner in training. So he's the one I like most to begin with. I think Cam Ward's a nice best ball pick because he's locked in as a starter, especially after Will Levis's shoulder issue. Not that Levis was going to be a real threat anyways, and then, we know Cam Ward, he's an aggressive passer. He likes to push the ball downfield, and he can run as well. 336 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns last year. There's a world where Cam Ward finishes 16th among quarterbacks in fantasy points this year, and that would be a big win in best ball from his current price.
Yeah, he might be a much better version of what they hoped Will Levis was going to be. He certainly has not turned out to be. Check our rankings on draftsharks.com to see exactly how we project and rank all these guys, and check the ADP market index. You can check it for best ball. You can check it for consensus, because those 2 formats are going to differ. They're going to show you some different values depending on how you're trying to draft. And you might also just get some insight into what you should expect when it's time to draft in your league. Whatever format you're playing, whenever you're drafting, and whatever you're looking for, Draft Sharks is here to be your unfair advantage.